Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We welcome you once again to Wednesday nights with Inayet Wadee. And tonight being a special edition, we are talking about an event that many of us have been caught by surprise. We're talking about the return of the Taliban to power. And it is not, as the banner said, the return of the Taliban. They've been there all along. And it is amazing that 20 years later, I had, in fact, 20 years earlier, I had basically started off my broadcasting career, and it took place at the time of 9/11, and it took place at the time when the occupation of Afghanistan had taken place by the occupying forces, by the coalition of the willing, and not realizing 20 years later, we will be still talking about the Taliban returning to power. Now, we have assembled quite an interesting panel of guests coming across various spectrums and obviously looking at the various issues with regards to the Taliban now that they are in power, where to from here, and also looking at some of the developments that have taken place over a period of time and how this has impacted on Afghanistan and also on the Taliban themselves. Now, we have got a panel assembled out of the UK. We have got Dr. Nazreen Nawaz, Women for Khilafa. We will be joined shortly by Dr. Yvonne Ridley, British journalist, and many of us will recall that she was captured by the Taliban. Also, Professor Richard Falk, former UN Special Rapporteur at Palestinian Human Rights. We have got Mazhar member of Hizb ut-Tahrir in the United Kingdom. And shortly, we will be joined by Ahmed Quraishi, Pakistan-based political analyst and journalist. Now, while we are waiting for Ahmed Quraishi to join us, we have got the panelists on screen. And just to remind our listeners, as we welcome you to the show, this broadcast is coming to you live on the various on the platforms of Salam Media and also on Facebook Live. We are coming to you live on our YouTube channel, so you can view the proceedings. To all the panelists, Dr. Nazreen, Dr. Yvonne Ridley, Madhur Khan, and Dr. Falk, good evening. Assalamu alaikum to all of you and welcome.
Walaikum assalam wa barakatuh.
Well, Yvonne, I'm going to be starting off with you because I know, you've written extensively on Afghanistan and over a period of time. I think, if I recall, 2 or 3 months ago, you wrote an article with regard to the return of the Taliban to power. And this was coming. It had to come at some point in time. And 20 years later, now that we see the Taliban back in power, how do you see the developments in the build-up to what we have seen happening in the last few days?
Well, people are saying that they're surprised, but if you look at all the signs, in fact, I think I wrote last year, it wasn't a question of if the Taliban get to power, it's when they get to power. February the 29th last year, they signed the Doha Agreement with America. And if that didn't send a warning sign to global observers, then, nothing would. The Taliban of 2021, I think, is quite different in a lot of ways to the Taliban of 2001. I think they're much more media savvy. I think they are much more mature, have grown in wisdom and stature, and they recognize how powerful women are and how they have to acknowledge and give them their rights. And so these are very interesting times. They're making all the right sounds at the moment. And let's just hope that they will continue. It's interesting that the UK forces are collaborating with them at the moment on the ground to try and get a peaceful and calm evacuation underway from Kabul. And I was listening to the head of the British military talking today, and he was explaining the culture and character of the Palestine through the Pashtun-Wali code of honor, which they adopt. And I was quite impressed with what he had to say. And I thought, what a pity he hadn't been in an influential position 20 years ago ahead of the invasion, because he seemed to understand the Taliban and from where they're coming.
Yes, and Dr. Falk, just to bring you into the discussion now, obviously looking at where we are at this point in time and what this actually means for the coalition of the willing, led by the United States of America. And, often we've heard the term Afghanistan being the graveyard of empires. And decades later, we've seen superpowers. In my lifetime, I've seen the Afghans obviously bring the Russians to their knees, now America as well. And as one analyst put it, he says, this was the great American Ponzi scheme that has basically ended in Afghanistan. Your thoughts on what it actually means for those obviously who had gone into Afghanistan, the coalition, and has it been mission unaccomplished?
I think above all, it displays a continuing historical illiteracy on the part of the United States, its foreign policy, and particularly its political class. It continues to believe that having military superiority is relevant to controlling political outcomes in a post-colonial era. And that's a fundamental flaw. It should have been a lesson learned in Vietnam in 1975 and elsewhere subsequent to that. But because the United States has invested so heavily in military approaches to security, it's unable to learn what the historical shift in the balance of power in favor of national resistance forces, even when they're militarily much inferior. And the Afghanistan collapse of the Kabul government so rapidly also shows how little the United States understood the people that it had spent trillions of dollars over the 20-year period to train and equip to neutralize the presence of the Taliban in the country. So it's a colossal repeat of the Vietnam disaster, and at the expense of another people, subjecting it to much devastation and suffering that really is a gratuitous imperial legacy under changed historical circumstances.
Yes, I see Ahmed Quraishi has joined us out of Pakistan. Ahmed, assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show. And also, we've got all the panelists with us. I'm sure you are able to see them and hear us loud and clear.
Yes, thank you very much. It's good to
right,
be here.
Dr. Nazreen, your thoughts. And I know you have been following developments in that part of the world for a very, very long time. The Taliban, the return of Taliban to power, what does it mean? If you could please just unmute.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Jazakallah khair, brother. So basically, your question about whether this was a surprise in terms of the Taliban taking over power, it really was not a surprise. It was just a matter of time. You found in the last decade that the Americans were trying to negotiate with the Taliban to try and come to a certain agreement. And the reason for that is that this was a war that was unwinnable. It was unwinnable for various reasons. The first main reason, is that the US invasion and the implantation of a foreign regime, Western-supported regime in the country, was not going to be accepted by the masses in Afghanistan, because the masses in Afghanistan, they have a strong attachment to Islam and the Islamic laws. And so no way were they going to accept a Western-implanted regime within their state. Secondly, this was a regime that was inherently corrupt, inherently incompetent in all levels. And so naturally, it was just a matter of time that both the regime and both the US government realized that, their time was ticking away. So I think it's a real lesson, brother, in terms of the politics of the Muslim lands. which is that you cannot expect to implant a Western-based system, whether it's a secular liberal system in the Muslim lands, and expect the masses to embrace that. Recent polls, independent polls like from Pew and so on, have shown an overwhelming majority, especially in Afghanistan, over 90% supporting the Sharia laws as being a source of law within that country, the main source of law within that country. So really, in response to your question, it was just a matter of time. This was an unwinnable battle. And the reason why the Taliban was given support is because these are Muslim brothers who come from the soil of Afghanistan. You know, they have many networks and connections within there, and their values that they support reflect the values of the population. But I think now the question is, what's the future? What direction is the Taliban going to take within the country? Are they going to repeat their mistakes in terms of the partial implementation of Islam, or are they going to take a different direction?
Well, obviously, these are interesting times, and I'm sure, you know, for you, Mazhar Khan, as well, you know, following developments, these have been very, very interesting times for not only for Afghanistan, but also the entire world that is looking upon at Afghanistan at this point in time. And I think very few would have thought that it would happen so soon. The key issue here is Afghanistan has got a huge impact. It's got a massive impact on the geopolitics of the region, but also when one looks at geopolitics in the world in general, because when one looks at the invasion of Afghanistan initially, it had an impact right across the entire globe. When one looks at the coalition that was assembled from many parts around the world, and it is clear with the return of the Taliban, this is going to definitely impact. And that is why the world is talking about Taliban returning to power.
You know, just echoing something which Dr. Nazreen has said, this was a failure waiting to happen. There is no way America could have got anything out of this. And the reason for this is, when they went into Iraq, they took the entire world. They couldn't take on Saddam's army. When they went into Afghanistan, the Taliban doesn't have an air force. The Taliban doesn't have a standing army. The Taliban doesn't have a trained army. The Taliban doesn't have navy. They don't have heavy artillery. All they've got is remnants of weapons they got from the Soviet invasion and some weapons that the Americans had given them, small arms fire. They couldn't go into Afghanistan and take them on by themselves. They had to get Pakistan to support them. And I think we mustn't forget that had it not been for the cowardice of Musharraf and the puppetry of Musharraf, America would not have been able to go into Afghanistan. So it was a disaster waiting to happen, because it's something America could not sustain by itself. So the 20 years of failure, the 20 years of destruction and killing and carnage, you know, we mustn't forget, Musharraf is the one who opened the door for this to happen. And America could never win this war by themselves. And the Pakistani population and the people of Pakistan never supported this, just in the same way the people of Afghanistan never supported this. And after 20 years, $2 trillion invested in here, millions of people displaced, killed, injured, maimed, and their own citizens. After 20 years, nothing has been achieved. Nothing to show for $2 trillion, nothing to show for 20 years. And forget their own interests. They claimed we came to build a nation. The education of girls in Afghanistan today is no better than it was 20 years ago. GDP has gone down, you know, and all they have managed to show the world is a completely corrupt puppet regime, which flew out with cars full of millions and millions of dollars of US bills. So, you know, this is humiliating for America. This is not a victory for the Muslim world yet. We're halfway there, but it is a catastrophic humiliation for the Western world that you threw everything, your technology, your military, your money, your manpower, and after 20 years, you got squat diddly. So this is a big humiliation. And today, the parliament was recalled for one of the few times in times of recess to come and talk. And if you listen to them, they were very downbeat, because they acknowledge and they accept that we have totally failed. So, you know, this is a juncture for the Muslims to take heart that, you know, We have been told by our rulers that we are weak and we are fearful. We've got huge armies in Pakistan, in Turkey and Egypt. And the Taliban were able to hold off America after 20 years. And the governments in Pakistan, Egypt, Turkey are telling us, oh, we can't do anything. This has exposed the lie. And you know what I think of when I see this? I think of the Wizard of Oz. You know, I think most of us are old enough to watch the Wizard of Oz. When Toto goes into the Emerald City and that little dog pulls across the curtain and exposes the Wizard of Oz as a useless old man. This is what the Taliban has done. It has empowered the Muslims around the world. It has empowered all the people who are sick and tired of Western hegemony around the world, a hope that, you know what, things can be different. And this is where we are now, that things can be different and we need to change the world onto a better footing for all people all across the globe.
Well, shukran for that. And Ahmed Quraishi, obviously being in Pakistan, and you've heard the sentiments that have been expressed by Mazhar Khan regarding Pakistan and what America could or could not have achieved without Pakistan, citing obviously the time of Musharraf as well. But at this point in time, looking at Pakistan, looking at the return of the Taliban in power in Afghanistan, what does this mean for Pakistan, which is the immediate neighbor? Please, if you could unmute, please,
Yes.
Ahmed. There we go. Okay.
Yes. Thank you very much, brother Inayet Wadee, and it's an honor to be with you again. Always a pleasure to be with you, as a matter of fact, and very honored to be with this very distinguished panel. All of them familiar faces, obviously. And just to be very quick, I'll just give three or four very, very quick points. Number one is, sitting here in Islamabad and following this, it's quite obvious that President Ashraf Ghani was done with by the United States. They were disappointed with him. He was done with the Pakistanis had enough of him. They wanted to ease him out. And it's quite obvious that the ease with which the Taliban managed to come in and do it without much fight. The Afghan forces did not put up much fight, despite having superior equipment and hardware, points to the fact that maybe even within his government, his inner circle, there were people actually who cooperated in sort of pushing him out in a peaceful way in order to avoid bloodshed in Kabul. So one of the key reasons why there has not, thankfully, there has not been bloodshed in Kabul, and it was expected, and it was a high probability that it could have happened with the weaponry that the Afghan forces had. It was quite possible that bloodshed and a major fight and a battle could have occurred in Kabul, at the gates of Kabul. It did not happen. Shows that some people within the inner circle of President Ashraf Ghani actually made this happen and secured a peaceful entry for the Taliban. Obviously, Taliban were capable of fighting and mounting this battle and fighting it out and entering the city. It was a foretold conclusion, but it was made easier definitely by some of the people within the inner circle of people who were close actually to President Ashraf Ghani and who probably abandoned him in the last few hours and days. And one of the signs of that is, at this very moment in Islamabad, we have key figures from people who were faces and names, Afghan leaders who were allied with the President Ashraf Ghani, with the Afghan government, and have been in power one way or the other over the past 2 decades, are here right now in Islamabad, trying to find and explore ways to talk to the Taliban. And while they're here in Islamabad, some of their representatives in Kabul, as a matter of fact, are meeting with the representatives of the Taliban in order, and still in Islamabad, we hear from diplomats, from people who are close to the Taliban, that there's still a possibility that there could be some sort of a peaceful arrangement where Taliban, as the victors, might allow the induction of some of the faces and people and political parties that were part of the Ashraf Ghani government. One thing is key here, and I have no doubt, and I would say this very bluntly, I have no doubt, and we see signs of that, I have no doubt that it is the US government that actually, as a matter of fact, helped also. It was disastrous for the Americans. It's so obvious, a huge embarrassment, a huge humiliation. The optics couldn't be worse. There's no doubt about this. But at the same time, there's also no doubt that Ashraf Ghani was abandoned, and people were sick of him. He's the person, he's responsible for this mess. He was given opportunities, not by the Americans, and Mr. Mazhar was referring to Pakistan's role. And Mr. Mazhar, let me just also tell you this. Pakistan was actually also helping President Ashraf Ghani. As a matter of fact, there was a sincere effort mounted over the past, I would say, 6 to 8 months to try to give President Ashraf Ghani the chance to clinch a deal with the Taliban for a peaceful government, a transition of power, and an inclusive government in Kabul. And it's him, not the Taliban. It's really him, President Ashraf Ghani, and his some of his closest aides who wasted that opportunity, to much disappointment in Washington and also much disappointment in Islamabad. So we are where we are right now. Very interesting that the Taliban have not resorted to reprisals, no revenge against people who are close to the government. As a matter of fact, everybody's surprised we do not even have hordes and hordes of refugees on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, or yes, there have been some, very few, on the Iranian border and the Uzbekistan border, but not the kind of exodus that was expected, that everybody expected. Even in Pakistan, the Pakistani officials had planned for 10 cities and a huge exodus. None of that so far. Let's hope it doesn't happen. But so far, hasn't happened. So, and the Taliban are trying to, do sort of mount a good PR campaign. I've seen a couple of videos, all of you have, I'm sure, where Afghan women are protesting against the Taliban themselves to their faces, and they're standing and they're just organizing the crowds. So they're mounting a good PR campaign for themselves to present themselves in a good way. So all of this, I conclude here, just to sum up, and I conclude here that it's very interesting, but let's see where it goes from here. I don't think anybody has a plan, not the Pakistanis, not the Americans. They're going as things move. Very interesting to see that in Panjshir, which was the heart of the resistance to the Taliban 25 years ago, the Northern Alliance, the son of Ahmed Shah Massoud is beginning to meet some of the people who are opposed to the Taliban. But let me just tell you, let's be very realistic. There's no chance, there's little chance to no chance at all that there could be mounted a resistance movement to the Taliban, so to speak, because not the Russians, not the Iranians, not even the Indians are in a position right now to supply them weapons and restart a civil war. So just to sum up, from a journalistic perspective.
Yes, I think very, very interesting. And Yvonne, I see you nodding your head as Ahmed was actually talking, because I think you've actually tweeted, and you even spoke about the Chief of Defense Staff, General Sir Nick Carter, getting a handle on the character and the culture of the Afghan people and the Taliban in general. And obviously, you having been exposed to the Taliban during the time when you were a journalist, at the time when you were captured as well, you know very well, and you truly understand this character and the culture of the Afghan people and the Taliban. And this is the reason why a number of issues that Ahmed actually mentioned, and he spoke about China, he spoke about India as well. At this point in time, if they don't understand who the Afghans really are, obviously you are on a hiding to nothing if you're trying to beat the Taliban. Yvonne, if you could unmute, yes.
Oh, Lordy, am I not on mute? No,
you're fine. You're fine.
I'm fine, right. I think that the Taliban, while they were winning hearts and minds on the ground in Afghanistan over the last few years, they have also been looking beyond their borders, because for Afghanistan to succeed, it has to have a strong economy and to create jobs and to create wealth for its people. And the best way to do that is to get the neighbours on board. Now, we all know the worst kept secret is that Pakistan has been helping the Taliban. But listening to Imran Khan the other day, he also publicly made some positive sounds about the Taliban. I think that Pakistan and Afghanistan can do business. And if that happens, it eases the tension across the longest border for Pakistan and Afghanistan. And it means that that tension also releases the military to police its other border more heavily with India and occupied Kashmir. So it makes sense for Pakistan and Afghanistan to have productive relations. The Taliban have also been making overtures to Shia-controlled Iran. Now, this has surprised a lot of people because, of course, the Taliban are from a very strong Sunni background. But the fact that they're trying to reach over this sectarian divide and try and make peace with Iran is important. Of course, it's infuriated the Saudis and their Wahhabi influenced religious bodies in Saudi. And of course, Saudi's best friend, or new best friend, Israel, which is playing shadow wars with Iran, isn't happy at all either. So you've got this alliance with Iran, with Pakistan. They have also been talking positively and productively to the Russians, to the Chinese, which also have a small border, 27 miles long, I think it is, with Afghanistan. And Turkey and Qatar, which has played the role of peacemaker. So this is quite a strategic trading bloc. It's like a revival of the old Silk Road route. And that is quite sizable. And so the future looks bright, but we know how international politics works. We saw how the Arab Spring was crushed. I do hope the Taliban are savvy enough to keep an eye out for insurrection and an attempt to destabilize Afghanistan. And if it happens, I can tell you now where it will come from. It will come from Israel, it will come from Saudi, and it will come from India, because those three have absolutely nothing to gain whatsoever by a stable Afghanistan. But it's good news, I think, so far that on the Security Council, the UN Security Council, I think they'll have Russia and China on their side. So the West can throw as many teddy bears as it likes into the ring and start threatening sanctions and anything else. Nobody cares. Nobody will care. And so I think that, you know, the West has to take it on the chin, accept that this 75,000 strong army of poorly equipped Taliban fighters went through Afghanistan in about a week, like a hot knife through butter, and took control. Of course, it's not an ill-equipped army anymore, because it's got 300,000 Afghan National Army soldiers and their equipment. One of the strategic things that the Taliban did, maybe learning from the disaster that was the Iraq invasion, they have offered an amnesty, which is good news for the Afghan army. They've told the civil service infrastructure, carry on working, continue working. Of course, when the Americans got into Iraq, they disbanded the army and they disbanded the civil service. We know how well that worked. So I think that the Taliban have really been brilliant strategists and have, of course, they've had 20 years to think about it. But, you know, I do hope that they are allowed to succeed and that the great game is finished, it's over, and the meddling from outside forces to try and destabilize Afghanistan or fight another proxy war should come to an end.
Well, certainly, and also Professor Richard Falk, just following up from what Dr. Yvonne Ridley has been saying, looking at some of the looking at the powers that be, looking at the superpowers around the world, and we know the political dynamics that have been playing out with the United States of America, with the likes of Russia and China, and how strategic would Afghanistan be in these dynamics that are playing out? Now, I see Professor Falk, obviously we have lost him. Dr. Nazreen, let's get to you. And I think, just while we are talking on the political implications and what it actually means for globally, what does it mean for the global political dynamics that are playing out, Dr. Nazreen, and particularly looking at the Muslim world. And, I've heard Yvonne Ridley talking about the likes of Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and we know at that point in time when the Taliban, obviously, when America had initially invaded Afghanistan in the pretext of getting to Al-Qaeda and after 9/11, and all of that was basically playing out. And we know that, particularly looking at Saudi Arabia, looking at many parts of the Arab world, the support that they had landed to the United States of America in the invasion of Afghanistan at that point in time. Now, where does this leave? Where does this leave the Taliban at this point in time in relation to the Muslim world in general? Yes, Dr. Nazreen.
So it's natural that the Taliban would want to reach out to those within its neighborhood in order to establish various relationships and so on. But I think it's so crucial at this time for the Taliban, for the Muslim lands, to have a different political vision about how to approach the governing and the relationships with various nations and lands. The concept of the nation state, or the emirate, as the Taliban implemented previously, we see the nation state not a concept. Not only is it a Western produced construct that was produced in order to weaken the Muslim lands and divide them and disunify them in order to control the Muslim lands. We know the history of what happened to the Uthmani Khilafa and how it was divided up and how the false borders were placed between various lands, including between Afghanistan and between Pakistan. I mean, that line we know is a British legacy between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The nation state concept was produced as a means to basically enhance and continue Western influence within the Muslim world. So at this time, at this crucial time where Muslims around the world have such hopes in terms of what the Taliban and the direction that they will move, it's really important that we move beyond this nation state concept to a system which actually reflects the deep values of the people, the Muslims of Afghanistan and Pakistan and Central Asia and across the Muslim lands, which is Islam. And so the nation state concept has basically made nations dependent upon the West and dependent upon other foreign powers. And while that remains, you have this potential of foreign powers continuing to interfere in the politics of Afghanistan and basically take it down the same road of manipulation according to the interests of America and other foreign powers. So what we're calling for is a vision based upon Islam, the unification of Afghanistan with Pakistan, with Central Asia, based upon a system of Islam, a system that worked. You know, the Khilafa system based upon the method of the prophethood, which would actually make that region independent, self-sustainable, rather than dependent upon foreign powers in order to sustain it. I mean, if you look at China and Russia, I mean, these are countries that have notorious hatred towards Islam. We see what the Russians are doing in terms of Syria, the crusade against the Muslims in Syria, China and the Uyghur Muslims. Are we really putting our hopes in these kind of nations and the United Nations Security Council, the 5 members, in order to support Afghanistan and its development? No, you know, the Prophet ﷺ, he said the Muslim is not bitten from the same hole twice. Doesn't make the same mistake again and again. So if we want a truly independent region, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Central Asia, a state which will be prosperous, which will provide for the people, we need to look for a political vision based upon our ideals as Muslims in that region, which is the Islamic system. And one other point I would make, brother, is that these negotiations with America, which continue between Taliban and America, really open a back door to continued US influence within Afghanistan. And our advice to our Taliban brothers is that to end these negotiations, to uproot all roots of colonialism within their lands, and to have, like I mentioned, a new vision for this region that will truly make it a strong and stable place and a peaceful place and a prosperous place for the people of this whole region, and somewhere which will unite with the rest of the Muslim lands as well.
Yes, and just to bring Mazhar Khan, Mazhar, now obviously this begs the question whether the Taliban can go it alone. And also, I see Dr. Richard, Professor Richard Falk is with us. I just want to get back to my earlier question to you in terms of the global dynamics that have been playing out between the United States of America, Russia, and the likes of China, and looking at Afghanistan and how strategic is Afghanistan to all these powers in the game that are being played out, Professor Falk?
Was that directed at me? That
Yes.
I've had trouble with the being connected with the rest of the panel.
Yes, well, I think he's still having a problem. I'm sure he'll try and get us. But I think, Mazhar, just to look at, and possibly I should pose this very same question to you as well, but also in terms of the Taliban and it's reliant on the superpowers and the ability to basically go it alone or build the country on its own.
You see, the problem we have, we've got to give credit to the West that they are very good at snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. And that's because they're very adaptable, and they've got a vision, they've got leadership, they've got goals, they've got interest, and they work towards them. So previously, when they had direct colonialism in the Muslim world, so when India had the Raj, so when the Britain had its Raj in India, and when they were kicked out, they didn't give up. They adapted. So they left behind levers that they could pull upon. They left behind a ruling elite which they could rely upon. So Britain still benefited from the so-called Commonwealth, the previous empire. America does a similar thing. It's not directly controlling many nations in the world, but it is able to protect its interests and gain benefit from these lands. So they adapt. So colonialism has died, but neo-colonialism and capitalism is alive and well. And if we don't have an independent vision, we don't have independent leadership, and we rely upon the institutions that the West has put there, and we negotiate with these players, then we are going to fall into the same trap again, and we are going to give our the victory is there for us. The open goal is there for us to drive the victory home. We're going to lose that again. We saw that in the Arab Springs when we thought that using Western ideology, democracy, nation state will give us some kind of benefit, has been an abject failure from Tunisia to Egypt and Yemen. So as Nazreen said, we need to do away with these nation state concept. We need to have an independent vision and an independent leadership. We are not in need of the West. The Taliban have demonstrated that their power is not sufficient for them to maintain their control over us. You know, Pakistan is unique in the sense that it is self-sufficient. If Pakistan and Afghanistan join together, and we know there is a huge growth of Islamic feeling in the Central Asian republics, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, these people have a growing feeling of Islam. If these lands just came together If America couldn't defeat an army, an untrained army in Afghanistan, do you think they will able to compete against an Islamic bloc like that? And the Khilafa can grow and unify the world, and we can give protection and security to all the people of the world. Islam did not come for the Muslim. Yeah? Rasulullah came rahmatul lil alameen, for all the people, all over the world. Every single human being on the earth today is in the ummah of Muhammad. Whether they accept him, whether they reject him, on the day of judgment, they will have to line up behind him, not behind Isa alayhi salam, not behind Musa alayhi salam, but behind Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. This is his ummah. And we have to take that mercy of Islam to all four corners of the world and remove the corruption, remove the tyranny, remove the injustice of the global capitalist system. And we are not going to be able to do that if we keep thinking that we need to turn to the UN, we need to turn to America, and we have to have these negotiations in Doha. These negotiations in Doha is a last stand to maintain some kind of leverage or influence over Afghanistan. What the Taliban should say is, we don't want these negotiations because we're in a position of power. We don't need to negotiate with the losers. You've lost, you've failed. We will negotiate with the Muslim world and ask them to unite with us and work together and mobilize the ummah for the goodness of humanity, not for the Muslims, not for the Pakistanis, not for the Arabs, for humanity. This is the message of Islam. And we need to now find some kind of confidence to say, say this, shout it from the rooftop. This is what we are about. We are here to end the tyranny of Fir'aun in the guise of the colonial American hegemony. This is what we're here for. And we should say it confidently and loudly and give that message and bring that to a fruition and a realization. And the Taliban have given hope that things can be different. We just need to drive it home.
Yes, and Ahmed Quraishi, just following up from what Mazhar is talking about, and obviously Pakistan, a lot of reliance going to be placed on Pakistan in terms of the Taliban and wanting to move forward. And now that they are in power, and we know that a lot has changed, I would say, from the time when the Taliban were in power well over 20 years ago. Technology has changed. So much has basically changed. There's a lot more information that is available. And the key issue here is, how will Pakistan and Afghanistan embrace each other to find a way forward, and also in terms of assisting each other in finding this way forward.
Right, brother. And one of the reasons why we have not seen much bloodshed in Kabul and other cities in this latest campaign by the Taliban is because the Afghan people actually tested the Taliban for 5 years and now tested whatever replaced the Taliban for 20 years. And basically what they want now is peace, and they want prosperity. They want to move forward. And many of the interviews that we've seen on the streets of Kabul by Afghan media and international media basically point to this direction. So people are willing to give the Taliban a chance. So this is also, it's very important that we also, when we talk about the situation, the geostrategic aspect of this whole thing, it's very important to point out that the Taliban also face a test. The Afghan people are also giving Taliban a chance to offer a good replacement to all those bad people who were in power for 20 years, to all those experiments, foreign implanted, Western implanted, whatever. But the point is, the Afghan people are also giving Taliban a chance. It was really good to see the Taliban also sit with the media people on Afghan inside Afghan television studios, with even Afghan women journalists and TV anchors. So it just shows that there is a cautious acceptance from all sides for each other. They're willing to move forward. So it's really very important, before I move on to your question, that it's also a test for the Taliban. Some of my esteemed colleagues here pointed out that there would be attempts to scuttle this attempt by the Taliban to rule over Afghanistan and bring this change. But it also, the onus also falls on the shoulders of the Taliban not to give a chance to others to meddle in. And the way to do that is by offering a good example for governance. All the bad things that are normally said whenever religious groups or Islamic groups or Islamists come to power, the Taliban have an opportunity now to dispel all of that and offer something peaceful, an example, a good example. So let's see how they move forward with that. And that leads me to the second point and to your question. The Taliban, when you talk about Pakistan, there was a time one of the key differences now from what happened back in the 1990s is that in the 1990s, the Taliban were directly dealing with the Pakistanis. They were not dealing with anyone else. And there was no exposure for the Taliban leadership with the outside world. It was always through Islamabad and always through Pakistan. It's very, very different now. Very different. In fact, now Pakistani officials sometimes have to knock on the doors of the Taliban and ask them, can you tell us what you discussed with the Americans in Doha? Can you just let us in on your talks with the Iranians, with the Turks, with the Chinese? So and this is true. This is not an exaggeration. I've spoken to Pakistani officials who said this, and this time we've had meetings between the Taliban and the Iranians in Tehran, in Doha, in Moscow with the Russians, in Beijing, where Pakistan is not in on many of the details. I specifically recall speaking to a responsible senior Pakistani official who actually said, we went to the Taliban and asked them, when they started speaking to the Americans in Doha, we actually asked both the Americans and the Taliban to please, let us in on what's happening so that, we can manage things better. So this is where we stand. So Pakistan does have, obviously, because of the Pashtun element, we have relations in my family. I'm sure you'd find every second Pakistani who has some sort of a relationship or some link with the Pashtun culture and so forth. And we have those links with the Taliban, obviously. But at the same time, the Taliban now are I wouldn't say independent. They're heavily reliant on the Pakistani sort of territory to move in and out and for support and so forth. But and also for diplomatic support. But at the same time, the Taliban now have options. They have contacts with the Iranians, with the Americans, with the Russians, with the Chinese, with the Turks, with the Qataris. So it's how this thing plays out. I would not claim to know really how this would play out. Does that diminish Pakistan's influence over the Taliban? Absolutely, it does. It does not end Pakistan's influence, but it affects Pakistani influence over the Taliban. How that plays out, we have to wait and see. Pakistanis, by the way, have decided not to be the first to recognize. First of all, the Taliban have also done another good thing, which is they have not rushed to declare their own government. They're giving a chance to back-channel attempts for a power-sharing agreement with other elements of the Afghan political spectrum. But Pakistanis have decided that we will not be the first to recognize the Taliban government. We would move on with everybody else. We'd like to. That's good for the Taliban too. It will give them wider acceptance, but at the same time, it's very important not to pitch Taliban against the world. It's very important for the Taliban to be seen as working with the world, and it's not good to sort of feed on the fears. It's not good, and luckily the Taliban realized that. So it's you can see how hard the Taliban leadership have tried during the first press briefing and through other ways, through the media appearances with female television anchors and journalists. They've tried to sort of dispel those impressions. So they realize that they need to do this. And initially, if you recall last week, about 10 days ago, when the Taliban began their offensive, there were reports of some reprisals, some of the human rights violations and concerns and so forth. And the Taliban immediately moved to contain that, to end it. And instructions were passed on to Taliban soldiers who entered Kabul to be very careful about these things. So let's hope for the better, because the objective here is really not the win of this party and that party. The real objective is that the Afghan people really deserve peace. They really deserve that. And I end with this very beautiful picture, photograph actually, which I saw today. When hundreds and hundreds of Afghan men were jam-packing the Kabul airport, that very morning, many of the Afghan students of the Kabul University and many of them, by the way, female students, girls, young women, the Kabul University, schools, they were seen going to school. Many of the families actually in Kabul, not other cities, but in Kabul, actually sent some of their kids to school, including female students. So the Afghans do really deserve peace. They deserve it. It's good that we don't have an exodus. It's good we don't have refugees. Hopefully, Taliban will consolidate that. Whether people like it, I tell even my friends in the Western media, elsewhere, you may not like the Taliban. We can have a long discussion about them, many problematic things. But the thing is, they're there, they're a fact. Many Afghans are willing to give them a chance. And they are Afghans, after all. Obviously, it's their country. So let's give them a chance. Let's hope. And I think the focus right now should be on how they can consolidate their gains so as to benefit the Afghan people. The first thing right now is the interest of the Afghan people. This really great nation, great people, the Afghan, hospitable people, nice people, good people. They've suffered for 40 years, beginning with what the Russians did to them, and all the way through what happened in these 4 decades. I think it's time to put an end to that. Let's focus on that.
Yes, and just to bring Dr. Yvonne Ridley back into the discussion. Now, Yvonne, you've heard what Ahmed had to say, and also in terms of consolidating and looking at credible leadership in Afghanistan. And, we've seen the Taliban of today, unlike the Taliban of yesteryear. We've seen what has happened with the press conference, a lot more accommodating. And the key issue here is to win over Afghan society. And just to understand, what does the Taliban need to do to obviously offer what we know as credible leadership, but also at the same time making sure that Afghan society is 100% behind them?
Well, I think that, as I said before, the Taliban of today is much more mature and ready to govern. In the 90s, they had no ambitions to be in power. It was thrust upon them. And instead of reaching out to the rest of the world, they retreated inside an Islamic bubble. And that was the worst thing that they could have done. As Ahmed said, their only real strategic relationship was with Pakistan. As we've seen in recent days, the Taliban are reaching out. I don't think that they have ambitions beyond their own borders. Historically, they never had. They will have a plan, because everything that they've done so far, they've obviously mapped out, and they've had 20 years, as I said, to think about the next step. And I think that the best thing that they can do is show Islam in the best light possible. The whole world is looking at Afghanistan now. And, what better way to show how peaceful and comprehensive a faith Islam is to carry on conducting themselves the way they are. And I know Nazreen was talking before about a caliphate. What they did in Afghanistan is a lesson to the mess that is in Syria, where bands of Muslim groups or Muslim fighters have been infighting, fighting between themselves, and have shown Islam in the worst light possible, with beatings and torture and kidnap and criminal behavior. And that has really impacted negatively across the rest of the world. The one thing that you can say about the Taliban is that they are solidly united. Their faith in Islam is unbreakable. They're holding on tight to the rope, and they are unified. And this is something that the groups in Syria should look at and ponder. You know, at one stage, the Syrian civil war had reached such a stage that Assad looked as though he was on his way out, and then it all fell apart. It fell apart because there was no unity. There was no one ummah idea, one concept. They all went off in different directions. So if indeed, I know that you do dream of a caliphate, that, you know, the Taliban are showing an example of what a united front can do. And this is such a small band when you consider what they faced when they had this this military campaign through Afghanistan, and they took the country more or less peacefully and were able to go through at such a rapid, breathtaking pace that it certainly caught out the West. And so, yes, they've got a chance now to show how beautiful Islam can be.
Yes. Now, Dr. Nazreen, I know a few days ago you wrote a piece, and the major talking point immediately when the Taliban had entered the gates of Kabul have been women. And we know 20 years ago as well, you know, women featured very, very prominently. And I want to spend a few minutes just talking about women and about this piece that you wrote about this concern of on the part of Western governments, on the part of politicians, on the part of feminist organizations who have become, I would say, somewhat obsessed about the Taliban and about women. And if you could just share some of your thoughts and what you had basically, spoken about in that piece that you had written.
Okay, sure, brother. Inshallah, I want to address it. Just if I can take up one point that Sister Yvonne mentioned. She mentioned a really important point, which is the concept of unity between the Muslims, unity between, you know, Muslims across the world. The question is, how do you practically achieve that? And what will lead to an obstacle to that unity? And again, I come back to my previous point, which is that the concept of nation states and the building of borders between lands, whether it's Afghanistan and Pakistan or, you know, between other nations, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all of these actually is like a potential of creating that tension and friction and conflict between nations. We saw it between Bangladesh and between Pakistan. We see these lines of conflict between various Muslim nations in the world. Look at what's going on in Yemen at the moment. You know, so absolutely unity is the key here. But how do you practically achieve that unity while you maintain the nation state concept and these Western imposed, British imposed, French imposed lines? You know, these are arbitrary lines that have been drawn in by pencil between our Muslim lands. And while these lines continue, you will always continue the potential of conflict over these territorial nationalistic borders. So I think we need to move on in terms of what kind of vision can create that unity between the Muslim lands and create that prosperity. In terms of women, brother, absolutely. I mean, I think the first point we need to address is that this picture that is being painted by US and British governments and Western politicians and various feminists and certain sectors of the secular media in the West, that the Afghanistan, as a result of the colonial invasion, as well as a 20-year occupation of the lands, was led to some kind of success story for women in the country. And as a result of US troops leaving and the Taliban taking over, that women risk losing it all now as a result of this situation. It's absolutely nonsense. Afghanistan was not a success story under 20 years of US-British coalition occupation. Actually, if you can describe it, we describe it as a hellhole for Afghan women and girls. This was a land where you had death, destruction, displacement, constantly thousands of women and girls killed as a result of this venture. It created the second largest refugee crisis in the world. You know, hundreds of thousands of women and girls had to forced to leave their homes. Tens of thousands of others made war widows or dying from starvation and disease. And also, as a result of the occupation, it created a lawless society of abductions, of rape, increased violence, poverty increased in the country. According to the World Bank, before the invasion, level of poverty in Afghanistan was around 34%. As today, it's 55%. It's gone up. So it created a desperate situation in the country for women. In fact, the gender activists across the world had to admit that Afghanistan, under this occupation, became one of the most dangerous places in the world for women. You had women setting themselves alight because of this desperation, burning themselves. 80% of suicides in Afghanistan were women. This is basically, it goes against the trend of other countries where the majority of suicides are men. Because of the desperation women faced within the society, sky-high mortality rates. Education, you know, they're scared about, okay, what's going to happen to girls' education once the Taliban take over? 2019, UNICEF said that 3.7 million children are still out of education in Afghanistan. 60% of them are girls. Human Rights Watch said 2/3 of girls in Afghanistan are still out of education. 40% of schools in the country don't have a building. And the rest who do have a building, they're falling down. And can you imagine 20 years after occupation, around 84% of women in the country are still illiterate. Can you believe that? So you think about all the millions that were put in. So what kind of rights are America and Britain and Western politicians and media actually scared of that girls and women are going to lose with the Taliban coming in and with US troops going out? Right to education in a state where the education system is on its knees? Yeah, are they scared of political rights of women going? That they're not able to enter a parliamentary system? Why would they want to enter a parliamentary system that is corrupt and incompetent to its core and only served the few that were in power, an American installed regime? Are they scared that women will not have the right to employment in a state where the economy is crippled? So absolutely, the first thing before we talk about the future of girls and women's lives in Afghanistan, we need to really dismantle and discard the kind of false information that's going around at the moment that, the removal of US troops is going to create some kind of quagmire for women within that society under Sharia. We know this is an oft repeated kind of narrative that is used by Western governments, women's rights, exploiting it in order to create fear, in order to allow them to and justify them to have continued intervention in Muslim lands.
Yes, I see, Ahmed, you've just tapped a note here saying you've got a comment on a point that Dr. Nazreen has just raised.
Yes, that's it. And I, of course, I listened very carefully to what Dr. Nazreen was saying. I fully understand where she's coming from. I mean, this whole debate about the borders, the Khilafa, the system, and her focus on that. And she's done a lot of work in this area. And I've been following some of that work of her organization. But the thing is that when we're discussing Afghanistan and when we raise these points here, if you go back to the first press conference by the Taliban in Kabul yesterday, you notice that one of the key things they've emphasized is actually Afghanistan's borders. And they very specifically clung to the idea of a nation state with the existing borders. And that is their focus. They do not want to get out of those borders, as Dr. Ridley also referred to. So I'm not sure how you can reconcile this very rich, very legitimate, very interesting debate about the future, the systems that nation states here in this region should have, the Khilafa, and all of these things with actually the actual agenda of the Taliban, which is to remain within their borders, stick to those borders, respect them, not move beyond them. In fact, I specifically refer to the mention of borders by the Taliban official who held the press conference yesterday in Kabul, where he he was very clear to highlight that Taliban respect the borders. They will not go beyond them. They will respect the interest of other countries. So they're clinging to the idea of a nation state. I'm not sure if this is the right time to really bring in this debate about Khilafa, which is very legitimate. And I understand the urgency of that and the work done and the research done with that regards, and it's a very legitimate debate, and we can have it at any time actually. But would this be a good advice to give actually to the Taliban at this moment? Just an idea that I thought I float here for your benefit and also to Sister Dr. Nazreen's benefit.
Yes, I see Mazhar Khan also wants to basically comment on this issue surrounding borders.
Let me just touch on the border issue first and foremost before I touch on the women issue. You know, when we are made to believe that the borders are sacrosanct, right? We are made to believe that these borders are really important. We need to respect them. We need to respect the nation state. France and Germany killed each other over 2 world wars. Millions were slaughtered. They have enmity going back hundreds and hundreds of years over religious issues, nationalism, identity. France, Germany, Italy killed each other in 2 world wars. Yet together, they have a Schengen agreement. They can cross borders. They've got the same currency. They can move goods about. They can move people about. You can live in any country you like. You've got the same currency. So how is it that these people who hundreds of years killed each other, they can come together? But somehow for us Muslims to come together, oh no, that's impossible. We've got the same religion. We've got the same book. We've got the same Sharia. We've got the same beliefs. We've got even similar languages. We've got the same Arabic language. And somehow we can't do this. We need to realize this is a fraud. This is a way of keeping the ummah disunited, and we need to throw away these Western ideas which we believe in more than they believe in. Europe can come together. They can have all sorts of cooperating economic blocs can come together. They can have free trade agreements, but somehow the Muslims can't have that. Well, we need to start saying no, because the Taliban have showed that the West are not as strong as they are, and Taliban should take note. And the Taliban should take note that don't make friends with the Americans, the Chinese, the Russians, or any of these people, because Pakistan knows better than any other nations that America doesn't care about its friends, right? So just now, Mr. Ashraf Ghani, they just tossed him aside. He didn't achieve what the Americans wanted. They tossed him aside. Ziaul Haq got the entire Pakistani army to aid the Afghans repelling the Soviet invasion. And what reward was Ziaul Haq given? He was thrown out of a plane, right? America does not care about its friends. America is not a reliable partner. Russia is not a reliable partner. Britain is not a reliable partner. We Muslims really, really, really need to start thinking outside the box, inside of Islam, and thinking independently for ourselves with our own political concepts, with our own political ideas, with our own economic agenda for the world. Because if we keep thinking that we need to hold on to the tailcoats of the Western powers and the Western institutions, we need to realize these are the very tools they are using to keep us divided and weak. So I don't believe that Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, the Central Asian republics, for them to come together is not unsurmountable. This is more than possible. If France and Germany and Italy can come together, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Central Asians can come together more readily because we share the same agenda, the same deen, and we have a same vision. The thing we lack is an independent leadership. And that is what we are screaming for. Once we have that independent Islamic leadership, then Bengalis, Pakistanis, Afghanis, Uzbeks, Tajiks, Kazakhs, we can be brothers again. We can be one ummah, and we can take a message to the four corners of the world. And remember that people are thinking, you know, oh, you pie in the sky. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took the Arabs who were probably even in a worse off position than the Taliban or today, and within 100 years, Islam was in Spain. Persian Empire was no more. So we need to have a bit of confidence in our deen. We need to have a bit of reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we need to really think for ourselves. And just to touch on the woman's issue, really, this issue is such a nonsensical issue. You know, we need to present to the West that, you know, look, we actually respect women. We don't need to say this. We know how to treat women, right? Our book tells us how to deal with the women. We should be telling Boris Johnson How do you treat women? We should be telling, the Americans, why is it that 500,000 women are raped annually or molested annually? You've got a problem in how to deal with women. You've got pedophile rings running around. You've got the Me Too thing going on. We don't have a problem with dealing with women. Women do have a problem in the Muslim world because we've got mutant systems which have been left behind for you. And the best way to help the women in our lands is to get rid of these post-colonial mutant systems so we can go back to the natural condition of the Muslims and the natural way we should be living. So yes, we need to think outside of the box. We need to think inside of Islam.
Yes, Ahmed, just looking at where Afghanistan is placed at this point in time now, we've seen a growing interest in Afghanistan against the developments of the last few days. We see China talking about including Afghanistan in the Belt Road Initiative as well. We know that during the Ghani era, during the Karzai era, India has had a huge interest in Afghanistan. And perhaps let's just talk about India specifically, because we've heard a few statements come through out of the Taliban with regard to India, with regard to Kashmir. And, some are obviously of the opinion that the Taliban return to power is actually working against Indian ambitions that they've held for a long time in Afghanistan.
Yes, it's one of the most fascinating aspects of this whole Afghanistan issue right now. The role of India, obviously, it's very interesting how the Indian government actually tried to reach out to the Taliban in Doha, Qatar, and there were, I think, a couple of meetings also held, but they were very low key. Mainly not because the Indians wanted them to be low-key. The Indian side wanted those meetings to be very public, but the Taliban apparently chose to not play them out a lot, possibly maybe in order not to create alarm in Islamabad and not to alienate Pakistan and Pakistanis. So it's a very tricky thing, and India's role is there are two sides to India's role in Afghanistan. One is a positive one, and one is a negative one. The positive one, where India helped with some development projects, very important ones. That was a good thing. The negative one is where Pakistan often cites a long history of about 7 decades of Indian involvement in Afghanistan, with the one objective of using Afghanistan's proximity to Pakistan's western provinces in order to create sort of a leverage to sort of pressure Pakistan on Pakistan's policy in Kashmir. So India has been using Afghanistan as a leverage to impact the situation in Pakistan's western provinces, particularly Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan, get connected to the nationalist insurgencies in these two provinces to balance out what Pakistan does in Kashmir from India's perspective. So this dynamic has been going on for 7 decades. It gets a huge beating now with the removal of Ashraf Ghani government. There's no question. So India, it does really hurt strategically because of that, number one. And number two, also because India has this huge investment in the Chabahar port in Iran. And India was hopeful, and frankly, it was going very well. Actually, it was not bad. It was slow, but it was moving in a good way. And India was well on its way to bypass Pakistan strategically through Iran to Afghanistan, Central Asia. That gets a hit as well for the time being. So this is an issue, obviously. And let's be also very, very honest. In the 1990s, probably the Afghan civil war would have ended with the entry of Kabul, with the entry of the Taliban into Kabul in 1996, had India, along with Iran, along with Russia, not prolonged the Afghan civil conflict by supporting the opponents of Taliban. So one of the reasons why the Afghan civil war actually moved, I mean, you can also blame Pakistan. Obviously, had Pakistan not supported the Taliban, it would have ended as well. But on the other hand, it was also India and Iran and Russia also that prolonged the Afghan civil war and Afghan misery by supporting the opponents to the Taliban. Now, India now cannot repeat that history because for many reasons. The Iranians also are not willing right now to jump the gun there. They have too many issues in the Gulf. They have too many issues in Iraq. They have too many issues with the nuclear program, the JCPOA, and so forth. They do not want to really get into the proxy warfare thing yet. It is a possibility, but not for the time being. Everybody's tired. Everybody's exhausted. Everybody's has so many things on their plate, on the platter. So the point is, right now, India is in a very difficult position. But let me conclude by saying it's not all lost for India. India does have a very, very good channel with the Taliban. It may not be very obvious, but it does exist. One example of it was, as I referred to, the meetings in Doha, Qatar, but there's another channel, and that is Iran. Iran has a defense, a strategic relationship with a defense pact, and a strategic relationship with India since 2003 and 2004, and both have been partners for about 3 decades in Afghanistan, mainly to sort of counter Pakistan's influence. And Iran has as you know, very, very good working relationship now with the Taliban, as Iran does now with many, many Muslim Sunni groups, not just the Taliban, also Hamas, also the Muslim Brotherhood in several countries in the Middle East, also several others. So the point is, the Iranians have a good working relationship now, communication with the Taliban. That relationship and that channel will definitely be, in some ways, be available also to India to sort of channel out and work and communicate with the Taliban. How India utilizes that, India is also trying to act responsibly, not to disturb Afghanistan at this moment in order not to alienate the Americans. So how this moves forward, how India moves forward with the Taliban is yet to be seen. I was very intrigued, and I conclude by this, I was very intrigued by a statement yesterday by the Indian Foreign Ministry, which said, we will, in effect, it said, I'm not quoting exactly, but in effect, they said, we will see what the international community does and we'll move accordingly, which is a very soft way of saying, well, if the international community is okay with it, we might be okay with it as well. So let's see. India is being very pragmatic at this moment. Let's see where it goes.
Yes, Dr. Yvonne, just 2 issues. I want to talk about leadership and obviously looking at the relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Now, the time of General Musharraf, very, very different times now with under the Prime Minister Imran Khan. Now, you've met with Imran Khan personally. You have spoken to Imran Khan as well. And just looking at obviously the leadership, both in Pakistan and India, how is this likely to impact? But at the same time, I want to talk also about the issue of prisoners. Now, we know when the US had invaded Afghanistan, they took thousands of prisoners, Guantanamo Bay. We've seen what has happened in Bagram. You yourself were captured by the Taliban. The case of Afia Siddiqui, which you brought out in the open as well. And, you know, all of this is obviously still playing out. And, you know, what is this likely, or, you know, how is this likely to play out as far as the prisoners are concerned? We know that already we've seen certain noises being made about Afia Siddiqui being freed because she was a direct consequence of the invasion of Afghanistan and the war on terror. So against all of this and the role of leadership, both looking at Taliban, looking at Imran Khan, also the United States of America in addressing some of these issues, which we know are going to be sticky points.
Well, with regards to Afia Siddiqui, I was thinking about this the other day, and obviously the Taliban's priority is getting a stabilized and strong Afghanistan in place. But once they do, and they, you know, they are at the moment dictating to the Americans, telling them, take your forces out, and they're quite belligerent about the September 11 date of the deadline introduced by the Trump administration. But I was wondering, as they gain in confidence, maybe it's something for the lawyers to consider. Afia Siddiqui's alleged crime was committed in Afghanistan, and that is where she should have been tried. So maybe the Taliban can order her extradition and put her on trial in Afghanistan. It will also give a chance for everyone to see how Sharia law operates. We get Western commentators running around, wringing their hands, going, oh, Sharia law. They don't realize that a lot of legal systems are actually based on the fundamentals of Sharia law, but also there is more of a burden of proof in the Sharia than there is in any other legal system in the world. So maybe the Taliban will be in a position to say we want her extradited and we will try her, which you know, I have complete confidence she would be exonerated, because she's a victim of the war on terror, not a perpetrator of the war on terror. Going on about the other prisoners, Ashraf Ghani could have saved himself the humiliating exit, and it was humiliating, that he had a few days ago, if he had listened to the Taliban and listened to various delegations, of which I was one, in which the huge stalling point was over the release of prisoners. There were 5,000 political prisoners left in Afghanistan, and all he had to do was to release them. And I'm sure that you know, the Taliban would have been prepared to sit down and talk and negotiate a deal with him face to face. Instead, he left in such a humiliating way. This could have been avoided. The issue of the other prisoners, I think there's still about 40 men who are left in Afghanistan, in Guantanamo. I hope they'll also be able to have a commission to investigate the war crimes that went on in Bagram, although I suspect when the Americans left Bagram, they will have forensically cleansed the place and dug up any bodies and got rid of any evidence, any incriminating evidence. But yes, there are still, you know, prisoners out there in the hands of the Americans that should be repatriated. And Afia Siddiqui is one. I have sat down with the elements of the Taliban leadership and tried to negotiate her release, and we were days away from getting that done. And to the point where we were organizing how Bo Bergdahl, who was an American soldier captured by the Taliban, how we would exchange Bo Bergdahl. And that was all going through until the ISI found out. And for some reason, the ISI, as soon as they found out, they put a block on it and said if she is released, she won't last 48 hours in Pakistan. And so Afia was taken off the table. And ironically, that decision to take Afia off the table opened the negotiations to bring out the 5 Taliban commanders from Guantanamo who have been instrumental in getting the Taliban to where they are today. They were taken to Doha, and of course Doha has been at the heart of the negotiations to get the Taliban into a peaceful transition of power. So it's funny how everything is interlinked. But I know that the Taliban leadership did care very much about Afia Siddiqui because I cared about her. And so I really hope that maybe they will be able to do something for her. The worst thing that Afia Siddiqui could have, and I know this hurts people, is a Pakistan passport. Because the ISI, for some reason, and I've tried to work it out, do not want her back. We know through Musharraf's book, In the Line of Fire, how they betrayed Muslims, how they sold Muslims like slaves to the Americans, and a lot of these Muslims ended up in Guantanamo, and millions of dollars were made. You know, Pervez Musharraf admits all of that in his book, but we'll, you know, the next few weeks and months are going to be critical, and I just, as I say, hope that there isn't international meddling from east or west to try and destabilize the Taliban. And, you know, let's, it would just be great to see Afghanistan back on its feet again.
Yes, I think that is has been a concern in terms of, you know, what efforts there would be to destabilize the Taliban again, Dr. Nazreen. And just looking at the Taliban and in relation to the Muslim world, and just to talk about the likes of Turkey, the likes of the Arab world at this point in time, because we know at some point in time they were part of the coalition that had basically invaded Afghanistan, or they supported the coalition. But in terms of damage control, can the Muslim world, can the likes of Turkey, can the likes of Saudi Arabia and some of the other Muslim nations do some damage control to get closer to the Taliban and obviously assist in some way in building or rebuilding the country?
I think it comes back to what I mentioned before, brother. It all depends upon whether we will adopt and whether that region will adopt a new political and independent vision for that region. We know that countries like Turkey and Saudi Arabia, the regimes have worked hand in hand with the US and with other foreign powers in terms of derailing the Islamic revolution in Syria, and they will work hand in hand. I'm talking about the regimes, not the people. The regimes will unfortunately work hand in hand to try and destabilize Afghanistan and the region again, according to US interests. And it comes back to, again, the point that I mentioned. I just want to take up that point that Brother Ahmed was saying. He mentioned, is this the time to talk about the concept of the caliphate? I think this is the crucial time. I think Afghanistan is at a crossroads today, and it has two directions that it can take. It can either repeat the mistakes of the past by continuing, we mentioned the concept of a nation state dependence on other nations in order to be economically viable, which we've seen from other Muslim states, the disaster that's created. Look at other Islamic movements in the Muslim world, whether it's Ahnahda in Tunisia and the state that Tunisia is in at the moment, whether it was in Egypt, whether it's in Sudan, other Islamic movements, and even in Turkey as well. I would actually ask, is there any nation state in the world that has been successful as a result of embracing a kind of mixture between Islam and between Western ideals, secular ideals? Is there any nation that has been successful? And my real worry is that with all these hopes that we have upon creating a stable Afghanistan, a peaceful and prosperous place for a nation that has suffered for 4 decades, if we follow the same path, then we're going to really just herald a new cycle of misery for the people there, a new cycle of disaster and failure. And so unless we look at a different political vision now, as I said, Afghanistan is at a crossroads now that is viable, that is credible, that has a time-tested way of dealing with social problems, women, minorities, economic problems, political corruption, time-tested system, which the Islamic system of the Caliphate offers and did offer for 1400 years, then really this is going to be, like I mentioned, the start of another cycle of suffering for the people of Afghanistan. And so we must, inshallah, look at this system. You know, if the Islamic system, like Brother Mazhar, he mentioned that Islam revolutionized the rights for women. We know this. As Muslims, we're all here. We know it. Political rights, economic rights, educational rights. But these rights mean nothing unless you have a system that can bring them to life. And this is what we fail to have in our Muslim lands today, a system that can practically secure the political rights of women, the economic rights, the educational rights. Why? Because we have failed economies. We have crumbling education, healthcare systems, right? As a result of secular liberal systems implanted in our lands. So if we want to secure the rights of women and everyone, men, women, children, we need to look at a system from the Lord of the worlds, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who knows best and who showed us through 1400 years a system that actually excelled, you know, dismissed poverty. We know the history of the Islamic Caliphate, removed poverty from North Africa and from Iraq, a system where women produced thousands of female scholars and experts in medicine and astronomy and all of these things. But unless we have the correct system, this is all empty words on paper. And we will, continue the cycle of failure in our Muslim lands and division and conflict between countries based upon these false national interests and borders. So this is absolutely the time to talk about a new political vision and to present to the Taliban and others in that region and to have this discussion, at least to have this debate and discussion about a different way to do politics, a different way to govern our lands, by a system that is tried and tested and has been successful in all of these spheres, rather than going and emulating the same path of failure of all of these states.
Yes, Dr. Nazreen. Mazhar, we've heard the Taliban and we've heard the statements come through, talking about ruling by Islam. Now, there are those who hold certain concerns or reservations with regards to the capacity to deal with the problems that Afghanistan face in terms of rebuilding the country. Some have questioned the fact, whether they have engineers, whether they have scientists, whether they have economists, and looking along, secular lines on whether they have the secular education. But again, at the same time, whether one has Western or so-called secular education or Islamic education, at the end of the day, dealing with the problem at hand, dealing with rebuilding the country, dealing with governance. And, we've seen when the Taliban had basically entered Kabul, obviously reminiscent, brought us a lot of memories about the conquest of Makkah, where it was peaceful, where people were pardoned, where we've seen people get onto roofs, reciting the adhan, calling out the prayer as well. Now, all of that is fine. But the key issue, the real issue here is now that they will be entrenched in government in terms of dealing and, more importantly, building that capacity to deal with the problem.
If we frame the discussion in the terms of what will Afghanistan do, how can Afghanistan solve this problem, what resources it has, what ability, if we frame it in that way, that in itself is wrong, right? Afghanistan is not on its own. Afghanistan has brothers in Pakistan. Afghanistan has got brothers across the board in Uzbekistan, in Bangladesh, in the whole Muslim world. This is a Muslim issue. And if we now try to divide ourselves into different cages and say, well, it's their problem, they can deal with it. How are they going to deal with it? Oh, they need to negotiate with China. They need to get some benefits from Russia. We're making the same mistakes again. Now, we are in a strong position as a Muslim ummah, and the irony is this: even in times of weakness, our defeat hasn't been handed to us by the non-Muslims. Our defeat has been handed by treachery from within the Muslim world. So when the Mongols ransacked Baghdad, that was because of treachery. When the British Raj came to India and removed the last stronghold of Tipu Sultan, that was because of treachery. When the Ottoman Khilafa was destroyed, that was because of treachery by the Arab rulers and the Young Turks. It's always treachery from within. And the problem today is the West cannot defeat this ummah unless we have treacherous leaders amongst us. And this is the role Turkey played in Syria. I know it's hard for many people to accept that, but Turkey played a disastrous game in Syria, allowing Bashar al-Assad to remain. Pakistan played a disastrous game in Afghanistan in selling Afia Siddiqui along with many other people, and also my brother and my friend, Dr. Naveed Bhatt, who is still in a dungeon in Pakistan, which Imran Khan tries to ignore. The Pakistan elite tried to ignore. And there are many political prisoners in Pakistan. It is the treachery of the rulers at the very top of Egypt, of Pakistan, of Turkey, who are stopping this ummah from being able to stand on her own 2 feet. And if we keep framing our political debates and our progress in this context of nation state, then no, Afghanistan cannot help itself. Even though Afghanistan has got huge resources in its land. You know, the United States Geological Survey, they did research in Afghanistan and concluded that Afghanistan may hold 60 million metric tons of copper, 2.2 billion tons of iron ore, and all sorts of other very important metallic mineral resources that they need for modern day technology and modern day weapon. Afghanistan has that. Now, obviously, America is not going to let Afghanistan go. Britain and the Western powers are not going to let it go. They are going to use their puppets, those treacherous rulers in the Muslim world, to try and keep their interests alive in these lands and try to keep the ummah divided and to maintain their hegemony. And they maintain their hegemony through these treacherous rulers. So we need to start thinking, it's not what Saudi Arabia is going to do. Saudi Arabia has done huge damage to the ummah. It's not what Pakistan is going to do. Pakistan, Musharraf, and before and after have been treacherous to this ummah. And we've seen that across the Arab world. We've seen that across the Muslim world. So that's why we can't keep making the same mistakes over and over again. Taliban have shown us that we are not as weak as we think we are, and the Americans are not as strong as they claim that they are. So we can have the confidence. Taliban has shown the Muslim world that you cannot rely on the West. We can rely on ourselves. And we need to now have that independence, and we need to have that confidence that, you know what, we can make our own way in this world. We don't need America, we don't need China, we don't need Russia, and we don't need these puppet rulers. And Afghanistan has made a chink in this illusion that exists around the world that America is too powerful. Too long we've been told by our rulers, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. You know, we've got such strong armies in the Muslim world, Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan. We've got so much going for us in terms of being in strategic areas with resources, manpower, all sorts of things. We can't do it. Well, Taliban have just exposed your lie. Taliban has exposed your deception, and Taliban has exposed this web of deceit which is spun over the Muslim ummah, keeping her down. And alhamdulillah, that's the one thing good that has come. And now we should not be saying, what will the Taliban do? No, this is for the whole ummah to take part, to restart the promised Khilafa Rashida. And there are people in Pakistan, very well equipped people in Pakistan, very knowledgeable people in Pakistan, very competent people in Pakistan who can make a change. Who can make a change? And remember, when Masjid al-Aqsa was occupied for 100 years, we were told for 100 years it cannot be liberated, cannot be liberated. A Kurd came and liberated it. Not a Palestinian, a Kurd, a non-Arab came and liberated it. And I have high hopes that when the promised Khilafa Rashida comes again, and we know the hadith about the black flags coming from the land of Khurasan to liberate Al-Aqsa, this land has got so much promise that we should be looking that, you know what, let us be the ones who will be the next Salah ad-Din. We should look for big dreams. Yes, we are dreaming, absolutely, because we're living in a nightmare. When you're living in a nightmare, you have to have a dream. And we have a dream which is a promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which can be realized. And so as long as we keep thinking in the context of the current political setup, then we are setting ourselves to fail. So I'm just echoing what Dr. Nazreen said, that we need new vision, new leadership, and we need to think outside of the box.
Yes, in fact, Ahmed Quraishi, just your thoughts on the relationship that Afghanistan would be having with the rest of the Muslim world. And I've seen one or two comments come through, flashing across the screen. One talking or questioning the role of the OIC in this. And also, I think there was another message that came through talking about the time of Mohammed Morsi in Egypt and the role of Saudi Arabia, and how acceptance on the part of a Muslim world, particularly of a Muslim government. So just your thoughts in general about Afghanistan in the Muslim world.
Brother Inayet, I'll be very honest. There's a very clear division. I mean, obviously, no government has officially yet recognized the Taliban rule and the government. Some made welcoming statements, but nobody has recognized, not a single Muslim country so far has recognized illegally the Taliban government yet, obviously because the Taliban are yet to declare their own government. So it's a technical issue, but there's a division. There's no doubt about this. I can see it. A lot of the people who work in this region can see it. There are people in the Muslim world who are wary of the role of militant groups in whatever way or shape, whether they're in power or out of power. So you have a substantial body of work and people and officials and academia who hold this view. And then, of course, you have another viewpoint, which is, again, very substantial, backed by emotions and popular feelings and support, where they feel that Islamic groups do have a grassroots presence. They have supporters. They've done work. They've done good work. There have been mistakes, obviously. Dr. Ridley referred to what some of the Islamic groups did in Syria, the infighting, and how they tarnished the image of these groups. So there's a mixed bag of feelings in the Muslim world, and I think it's one of those difficult places right now for a majority of Muslim governments right now. I mean, even if you take, for example, the example of Turkey, of President Erdogan, for example, where if President Erdogan did want the Turkish military to have a role in post-withdrawal Afghanistan and to secure and run the Kabul airport, and the Taliban did not allow that, and that led to some sort of behind-the-scenes tensions between Turkey and Taliban, and also some I wouldn't call it tensions, but to some concern in the Turkey-Pakistan relationship as well, because of the whole history of everybody saying, well, it's Pakistan that is moving, is puppeteering the Taliban. So if Taliban wouldn't accept the Turks in Kabul, it must be Pakistan that is playing this game from behind the scenes, which is not true. Because there are many things that Pakistan wants to do, really, with regards to Afghanistan, that even the Taliban wouldn't allow Pakistan to do. Not now and not 25 years ago. But that's another issue for the time being. So there is whether you go to Ankara, whether you go to Riyadh, whether you go to Cairo, whether you go to other Muslim capitals, there's a lot of concern, so to speak. And let me just raise this, although this is not the platform for that, but Iran and Iran's relationship with the Taliban, there's a serious concern in many capitals in the region, certainly Ankara, certainly Riyadh, but also other Arab and Muslim capitals, where they feel that some elements inside Iran are trying to consolidate all the Muslim Sunni and Muslim Shia groups under one umbrella, where then Iran sort of uses them to exert its strategic influence in the region. Right or wrong, I'm not advocating, I'm not judging right now. I'm just saying this exists. This discussion, this debate is happening. It's not happening publicly, but it's happening in think tanks. It's happening in think tanks in Cairo, in Ankara, in Riyadh, in the capital of Jordan, in the Gulf states, in Iran, in Pakistan, certainly. It's happening all over, and the Central Asian republics, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, all of them. So it's happening. All of them are studying all of this. It's very complex. The interesting part is, and this is where I conclude, is that the Taliban are playing it really, really cool and really smart. They're not giving a chance or excuse to anyone to pin the Taliban with any one group. And one of the key statements that came out from the first press conference of the Taliban in Kabul yesterday was, we're not with any bloc. We're not with any regional bloc, whether it's Russia, China, Iran against the US, or it's the US against them, or, we're concerned with Afghanistan, with the people of Afghanistan. We will work within our borders. This was something that these Taliban official at the presser emphasized really, I think, 2 or 3 times during the presser. So this is very interesting. This is the feeling within the Muslim countries and capitals right now, although they're not discussing it openly, but you can see it from the literature of the state-linked think tanks in Abu Dhabi or in Riyadh or in Ankara, Istanbul, or in Cairo, Jordan, Oman, all of them. The literature exists. You can see it on the newspapers and in the region if you're monitoring them. It's there. So there's a concern. Should we want the best for the Afghan people. If there's stability, that's good. If Ashraf Ghani was a failure and Taliban can do better, why not? But at the same time, there's some in the Muslim countries who say, well, should we really give a militant group a chance? Because that would inspire other militant groups. Should we give them a chance? And then you have the Taliban who are playing it very cool, very smart. They're not aligning themselves with anybody. They're trying to be acceptable to as much governments, both Muslim Arab governments and also international governments, as possible. So very, very fascinating dynamic. I would dare to say we're seeing this for the first time. Honestly, it hasn't happened before. A lot of people are sort of comparing Taliban's entry into Kabul with the way Imam Khomeini entered Tehran in 1979, coming in a French airliner and so forth. But I think this is a totally new experiment, cannot be compared to anybody else. Would be unfair, I think, at this stage at least, to compare the Taliban with anybody, really, with ex-President Morsi's government or with anyone else, really, or compare Taliban with other militant Islamist groups. I think Taliban is an experiment unto itself. It's a different one. It happens for the first time, honestly, that a group like this is driven out and then comes back in 20 years later. It's a totally new thing. Let's see how it plays out.
Well, certainly, and Yvonne, we've got about 10 minutes to go before we close off, and I'm going to go around and just with the panel give you about 2 to 3 minutes. Just finally, your final thoughts. And as Ahmed Quraishi mentioned, this is an experiment, and it's important to understand, how or what the end result is going to be as a result of this experiment that we see playing out.
Well, I tend to agree with Ahmed Quraishi on this. The Taliban are in power. They are playing it very cool. They historically have never gone beyond their borders, the borders so hated, understandably so, by Nazreen and Ahmed. But I believe that people will be pleasantly surprised by the Taliban. They have an opportunity to show the world the good side of Islam, and I hope that they use it productively. They're much more mature now. They're ready to govern, and I think that if they are allowed and there isn't meddling to undermine or destabilize Afghanistan, I think that people are going to be pleasantly surprised. The other thing is, they're quite a regional power now, thanks to the Americans, because they've got an air force now. They have a military. They're landlocked, so there isn't a navy. But I've just read somewhere that they have more Black Hawk helicopters than most of their neighboring countries, all courtesy of the Americans. What an own goal that is. But they're more than ready to take power, and I think Ahmed is right. Once they do announce the makeup of their government, we will see countries coming on board and giving them recognition. I know it's not what Mazhar and Nazreen want to hear, but it's far too early, I think, to be talking about a caliphate. What they have done is put down a very firm cornerstone, and they have shown the rest of the Muslim world, this is how you do it. This is how you take on a superpower and win. And I hope that those groups that are struggling in Syria right now learn valuable lessons from the way that they have done things, and they've done it Islamically correctly. There's no torture, there's no beatings, there's no disappearances. So far, you know, they're showing the model side of Islam.
Yes, Mazhar, I'm going to give you about 3 minutes as well. And just a quick comment, because I'm looking at one or two comments that have come through, and possibly you could comment on that as well, where one of them says that the Taliban should avoid states like Saudis and the UAE, and also concern about radical Islam, and citing the example here of Boko Haram, which was inspired by the Taliban in the early 2000s.
Well, you know, when I was held prisoner, I asked the Taliban about their relationship, and they did say, you know, the relationship with Al-Qaeda, and they did say they came in as our guests and started acting like our masters. I think that they will be very wary this time how they deal with the UAE and Saudi. I think they'll be much more cautious, and they certainly will not allow anyone to make them feel inferior again.
Yes, thank you for that, Yvonne. Yes, Mazhar?
Yeah, let me just finish with a closing comment. What we've seen with what's happened in the last few days is a 20 years failure of the war on terror. It's not just an Afghanistan thing, it's the whole war on terror is a failure of that campaign that the West had. The propaganda they use is hollow. Yeah, even their own people don't buy it. When they talk about women, when they talk about backwardness, they talk about, oh, we worry about what's going to happen to the people in Afghanistan. You don't worry about the people in your own country. So, you know, they realize that a lot of this propaganda is hollow. Another thing, like I mentioned, is this is a warning, and all the puppets have been put on alert that your sell-by date is coming. America doesn't stand by you. They have no loyalty to you. So you need to wake up and smell the coffee, yeah, and not play the game that you've been playing all this time. And just with what the Taliban has done by defeating the direct occupation, you know, there's still other threats. There's still many plans taking place and negotiations taking place behind the scenes in Doha and other places. But the fact that the American foot soldiers have been kicked out of Afghanistan, how much goodwill and good cheer and hope has that created in the Ummah? Because the Ummah is thirsty for victory. The Ummah is thirsty for independence. And if that has been achieved just by kicking the Americans, just imagine how much goodwill there will be for the Ummah if a real independent political entity emerges. And all this stuff they've done, throwing their money, their weapons, their plans. Allah says in the Quran, وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرُ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ, that they plot and they plan. Allah also plots and plans. And we are now seeing that the script is written, but it is unfolding. And we are saying that things are changing very rapidly. So rather than saying, you know, we're not ready, you know, we shouldn't do this, you know, people were saying we are not ready 30 years ago when Bosnia happened. People were saying we are not ready before that. We will never be ready. If we say we are not ready now, we will never be ready. And this has given us that, you know what, we can achieve a lot more than we think we can achieve. So I think this is all good, but we have not reached our destination. We have not achieved independence. We have not achieved the implementation of Islam, but we are moving in that way. And I think this should give hope to the Muslims. And there are very capable people in Turkey, in Egypt, and in Pakistan who are able to make a change, and they need to take this message and realize that if they can make a change, they can make a big change, and any good that comes from it will go to their accounts on the day of judgment. And this is what those people of influence need to think about.
Inshallah, Ameen. Dr. Nazreen, final thoughts.
Across the world, they, celebrated when we saw US troops leaving Afghanistan. My only hope is that that doesn't change to tears of misery or in terms of what we see in the future for this region. The question is, yes, the US troops are gone, but how do you uproot colonialism completely from our lands? Because, okay, Americans are left through the front door. Are they going to come back through the back door? Through influence, through their puppet rulers, whether it's Turkey or whether it's Iran or any of these other areas, or even through these negotiations they're having with the Taliban? Are they going to use the back door to enter in terms of influencing the politics of this land? So my final point is a saying of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu as a second Khalifa, where he said that we were a humiliated people and Allah gave us honor through Islam. Yeah. And if we turn to anything else for honor, then he will humiliate us with that same thing. So what I would say is that if we want a successful and stable future, not just for Afghanistan, but for Pakistan and Central Asia and the Muslim lands generally, then we need to turn to the system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which only has the ability to solve the economic and the political and the social and the moral and the educational, judicial problems of our lands. If we choose anything else, then we'll be humiliated by that same thing. And we've seen this in land after land after land. So inshallah, that independent state, that independent vision is something which is crucial for us, which can only be offered by the Islamic Khilafa state, based upon the model of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Jazakallah for that. And Ahmed, yes, you've got the final 2 minutes.
I will just thank you, Brother Inayet. This has been a very insightful discussion and very legitimate opinions here. Each one, actually, I can't discard any of these opinions. And I would just say that let's keep Afghanistan and Afghan people's interest first and foremost right now. It's very important, and it's also very important for the Taliban now to present a good example of governance to the world, not to impress the West or anyone else, but mainly to win the hearts and minds of the Afghan people themselves, who are ready actually to give them a chance now, because they've seen the experiment over the 2 decades. It has not led to anything. The last president ran away, escaped, fled, and with money, corrupt guy. So this is the chance, this is the moment for the Taliban, if they really want to transform from a militant group, from a militia, into a key player in this region that would have an impact on policy, on social life for years and years to come. This is the time to play it right. Let's hope they do it. Let's hope they do it for the Afghan people.
Well, Jazakallah khairan so much, and to all the panelists, to Sister Nazreen, Sister Yvonne, Brother Mazhar, and also to you, Brother Ahmed. Jazakallah to all of you for being part of this panel discussion, this very important discussion. And I think we've unpacked a lot and we've understood a lot as well. At the same time, bringing a lot of inspiration with your presence on the panel discussions on Salam Media. We do appreciate you taking time out, and we wish you all the best. Allah accept, Allah reward your efforts. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.
Barakatuh.
Well, that brings us to the end of another panel discussion on Wednesday nights with myself, Inayet Wadee. Most useful, most fruitful discussion in unpacking these developments that are taking place in Afghanistan with the return of the Taliban in the governance of Afghanistan. And with that, once again, we do appreciate your time, you taking time out to view us, to listen to us, and also all your comments that have come through on the social media platforms. We do appreciate those. So until we meet next week, once again, from myself and the team, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.